Hi, welcome to today's episode of the impacT podcast, where we talk to the leaders of today to find out how they got to where they are and how we may follow in their footsteps too. Today's guest is a distinguished figure in the field of economics and public finance, Dr. Prakash Kannan. Dr. Kannan is the chief economist and head of portfolio management at GIC. He is currently responsible for medium-term global macro and asset allocation for the firm. He also serves as a member of GIC's currency risk management group. Prior to GIC, he was with the IMF, where he was a member of the World Economic Outlook team and participated in missions to Turkey, the UK, Norway, and Cyprus. With that, let us welcome Dr. Kannan to our podcast. Hi, Dr. Kannan.
Hi. Good to chat with you.
Thanks. Likewise. So, actually, to begin with, maybe you can just give our listeners a better understanding of what you do on a day-to-day basis, and also maybe tell us more about what GIC does as well.
Sure, no, happy to do so. Actually, I'll make a little a plug for GIC because we just released our annual report last week. So if you go to our webpage, you can actually get the latest issue out, and it has a good overview, not just of our performance, but also just in terms of the entire philosophy behind the organization. So as you know, so reserves management in Singapore is kind of done by three entities. So you've got GIC, which is where I work, and then you've got two other entities, which is Temasek, as well as MAS, the Monetary Authority of Singapore. MAS tends to have a bit more conservative kind of asset allocation strategy, just kind of given that they are a central bank and the purpose of the reserves that they hold. Temasek has a bit more of a private equity focus, and GIC, I would say, is kind of somewhere in the middle. But the overall objective of what we're trying to achieve at the end of the day is to kind of both preserve as well as enhance the long-term purchasing power of Singapore's reserves. So within that, I play the role of the chief economist, and being the chief economist, I think basically myself and my team. We've got two broad roles within the organization. The first part is really to help the organization characterize the macro environment. So this would include, what are the key long-term trends that we are seeing, issues related to where are we in the cycle, questions about what are the major imbalances that we see in the economy. I think, and that basically helps both the side as well as our portfolio managers in terms of how they want to allocate assets. The second part, I think, kind of points more specifically to the process of asset allocation. And that is where effectively we take the characterization of the environment and then compare it with what's priced. So at any given point in time, you can look at your Bloomberg screen, or just look at a variety of sources for financial prices, and you can see what the market is thinking in terms of some of the outlook for macro. Right? You can see what the market thinks in terms of growth, what the market thinks in terms of inflation. And what we do is we try and compare that with how we see the economy evolving. And that comparison kind of leads us to making some asset allocation recommendations, which we think kind of will help get us that better returns. So that's kind of in a nutshell what both GIC does, as well as where myself and my team kind of fit into the big picture.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight. And I think when we look at your portfolio, we see that your career path has been from a bank to an international, to the IMF, and now to the health of a sovereign wealth fund. I think many of us would like to know what inspired some of these moves that you have made in your career.
No, thanks. It's a good question. Sometimes I have to admit that you only you only see clarity in hindsight rather than in real time. So if I was to look back at my career, I think the one common thread that kind of runs through everything is actually a notion of public service. So my first work experience actually was with a central bank, and it was with Bank Negara Malaysia. And there, I was actually working during the Asian financial crisis, which happened in the late 1990s. It was a very exciting time to be at a central bank. If you recall, or maybe in your case, kind of read the history books, we put on capital controls, fixed the exchange rate. So there was a lot of policy experimentation at that time. But the goal was really to try and help the country kind of get through the Asian financial crisis. After that, kind of left and went to the IMF in Washington, D.C. And there, once again, there is a notion of trying to, at least in my own little part, help build kind of global financial stability. And that was actually quite an eye-opening journey. You just get to see a very large range of economies. So I worked on economies ranging from the UK all the way to Turkey. And it was, just a very eye-opening experience, and kind of really built a lot of the frameworks that I have with me today. And then in 2012, I kind of came to Singapore, and once again, even though it is a financial institution, I think what motivates myself in GIC, but also I would say the bulk of the people who work here, really is that sense of a bigger purpose. And I think what happened over the past year with COVID, when the government launched all these supplementary budgets and trying to help the economy get through the whole thing, the fact that they drew down on reserves in a way was actually quite fulfilling for us, because it's one of those things where we've always called ourselves the rainy day fund, and then when actually it was raining, it was nice to know that with all the hard work that we had done, part of it was really at the end of the day for us to be able to weather these kind of periods without having to rely on external parties. So it has been a good experience, and I think that kind of notion of public service, I think, continues to drive me.
Thank you so much for everything that you have done for Singapore as a whole, and including as in your role as the chief economist at GIC. And I think something that is very consistent is that as you go up this corporate ladder per se, you get a lot more challenges that you have to face. So I think we would also like to know, we understand that life is not a straight path. There's a lot of challenges that come along the way, and maybe you could just share a bit more on what are some of the challenges that you have faced in the different career moves that you made.
No, sure. I would say, I think a couple of things, right? So the first thing is that I think as you progress up in your career, I think the stakes of your decisions kind of just get a lot higher, right? So your decisions end up being a lot more impactful. So when I was a junior economist in actually all the other organizations that I worked for, there was always a feeling that you could produce a piece of work and then kind of send the chain, and then you felt like, okay, that responsibility was gone, right, from your shoulders. There was basically a feeling that you've done as good a job as you can on this product, but then you kind of pass it to someone else. I think as you move up the corporate ladder, I think there is a very strong sense that actually the buck kind of stops with you. And so the stakes do get higher, and the responsibilities do increase. And I think there is a lot of kind of considerations that that you have to take, which when you were earlier on in your career, you didn't necessarily take into consideration. So I think that that kind of greater sense of responsibility, as well as maturity, I think is one of the biggest challenges. The second part, I think I would say, is that at the end of the day, it's very hard to do work all by yourself. And so there is a concept of not only building a team, but also motivating a team. And that is something which just doesn't actually come naturally for a lot of people. One moment you're a staff, next moment you're a boss. And a lot of people assume that that transition just happens naturally. What I found instead is that actually being a good manager involves a lot of work. It involves actually, kind of reading some of this management literature, actually taking courses, and then importantly, actually also devoting time. So I do take time out of my calendar every week to make sure that the team is all kind of aligned on our goals. So that, I think, has been a challenge, and I would say that for some people that transition is not as straightforward. And then what we saw last year, I think, made it even more challenging, because now you had to manage a team remotely. And so, when everyone's in the same room, you can kind of read body language, and okay, like person A is not feeling so well, maybe she needs to go home, or person B is happy, sad, etc. But when you're not in the same room, it's just a lot more difficult to empathize. A lot of my staff had problems, everything from health problems to internet problems. And those challenges, I think, increased a lot more. So I would say those two areas probably, as I moved up in my career, were the two areas that I found the most challenging.
Thank you so much for that. So maybe just moving on a bit more into your personal life. So actually over here at impacT, we want our activities to encourage everyone to make a positive impact on our community. Maybe you can tell us one experience you have had with working with the community and that you feel has made the biggest impact on them.
Sure. No. So in my role, actually, there is a certain aspect of what we call outreach that we do as well. And to be honest, the activities that I enjoy the most, and I do think has the most impact, actually are with with students. So I do an annual engagement with through MOE, and this talks to a lot of GIC students, so students who either are in econ classes, or are thinking about making a career as an economist. Those discussions, I find, in the past, when they used to be in person, they tend to be very candid, and at least based on some of the feedback I got, at least people kind of responded to it quite positively as well. And then I would say similarly, I also do once in a while some outreach things to secondary school students as well. Some of it tends to be, like what I'm seeing in the global macro, and kind of just thinking very, very big picture. But part of the purpose is just to say that, look, here is something which you may not have considered in your career, but that if you do find it interesting, it just kind of opens a new avenue, I think, for people to think about. So I would say it's actually those kind of engagement. In fact, even these kind of engagements, which I find actually quite rewarding on a personal level.
Uh, thank you so much for that. I think I don't think when we were in secondary school we had any engagement from the GIC, but I think that would be a very good opportunity, and actually allows a lot of youth to actually get a bigger insight into the financial capabilities that Singapore actually has. And actually on that front, as well as previously I've mentioned about the GIC report, we actually mentioned that there's a lot of emphasis towards ESG investing, as well as sustainability. And we've also noticed that on the DBS podcast, you mentioned about how ESG and companies that have stronger sustainability will deliver a super return. Maybe you could just elaborate more on what Singapore and GIC is doing to actually promote this.
Yeah, so I think this idea of doing well by doing good, I think is very strong, and I believe that if companies actually do adhere to kind of good sustainable practices along the lens of environmental or climate change related issues, as well as related to governance issues, we think that the market will over time reward them. And this, I would say, has been our philosophy as a long-term investor for a very long time. The question is always, what do you do with companies that are not adhering to these standards? I think the challenge here is that we don't think it is constructive for either party to just abandon these companies, because that we as our that's not going to result in them necessarily changing their ways. So instead, what we've been doing, especially for the companies where we do see that there is a potential for transformation, there is a potential for unlocking some of that value if they improve their practices, we've actually been trying to be an advocate and be a partner to try and help them make that transformation. So, for example, we did an investment in a coal company in the US. And it was mostly because that company really had strong plans to try and transform the business away from coal and into something more sustainable. And we think helping them unlock that value, we think, is part of this this process of kind of doing well by doing good.
Thank you so much for that. And just on that front, actually, we've heard a lot about carbon credit ETFs and how they are helping companies to become more sustainable in the future. Maybe, and many of us are wondering what these actually are, because there's not a lot of information about them online so far, and we are kind of interested in this. So if it's possible, we would appreciate it if you could help us to understand what these are and how they can be beneficial for the world going forward.
Yeah, so I think one of the solutions, I think, towards achieving or rather creating the right incentives such that we keep the overall increase in temperatures to kind of less than 2 degrees Celsius, I think, is to appropriately price carbon. Now, different countries have been approaching this differently. But in general, I would say that outside of Europe, the price for carbon right now, or these carbon credits, are actually still quite low. They are only, I think, on average, somewhere between $3 to $5. While some estimates, at least from the IMF, imply that these prices need to be somewhere closer to $70. Um, so Europe, I think, has one of the largest kind of carbon trading markets, and there I think you've seen the price has tended to go up. These I think are interesting trends to follow, and I think also if you think that over time the price of carbon is likely to go up, they could be interesting opportunities for investment. But personally, I think that at the end of the day, you want to try and I think there are different ways that you can approach this thing, and I think it's better to focus on one part, which is almost a risk management, which is either particular stranded assets or companies that you don't think can actually manage that transformation well. That's a bit on the defensive side. And then second, I think, is a bit on the opportunity side, which we think that are companies that can actually benefit from a new transition. We think that these things, the opportunity and the insights that we could have, I think will create much better value than just necessarily trading carbon.
Thank you so much for those insights into the industry. And maybe just to wrap up this part of our podcast, with the current circumstances and with COVID going as it has been going, how do you think Singapore should be moving its economy, especially its supply chains, given that we are still a very small nation state and we are very dependent on overseas for most of our supplies?
I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to ask you to repeat again. My internet connection has been pretty
No
bad.
problem, no problem.
So sorry. Your question again was?
Just in light of the COVID crisis, how do you think Singapore should move its supply chains so that we remain because we are a very small nation state and we still are very we depend on overseas countries for our supplies?
Yeah, actually, to be honest, when you look back at the COVID crisis, there were a lot of things that we were worried about. I would say maybe February or March of last year. And the surprising thing is that a lot of supply chains proved to be a lot more resilient than we thought. If you recall, when Malaysia first announced lockdown, everyone was panicked and they thought that your supply of food, everything from meat and vegetables, were going to be curtailed. But actually, that flow of goods actually proceeded quite well through the whole crisis. And even from Singapore's perspective, Singapore actually never restricted any exports at all, right? So we even played our own part in making sure that, given our entrepot kind of role, that trade will continue to flow. So when you put that together, actually, it was a remarkable amount of resilience, I think, in the supply chain. Where I think the kind of rethinking a little bit more, I think, would be about how can we capitalize on this post-COVID environment. I would recommend actually taking a look at this report that came out. I think it's called the Emerging Stronger Task Force, and it was a report that came out maybe about 2 or 3 months ago, and I think it has a good balance of not only solutions but actually also ways to implementation. So they created these kind of groups, which is linking both policy makers as well as industry to try and rethink, how Singapore can actually, emerge stronger. And these things, they include everything from the digitalization of supply chains, to your point, issues related to sustainability, but also, that frontiers of robotics, smart commerce, medical technology, all these areas which, the trends were there pre-COVID, but they've just been accelerated by the degree of digitalization that has happened. So I think those would be things which I would definitely read up on. I think it's a great report, and I think the action plans that have come out of it, I think, are also quite useful.
Thank you so much. I think we will definitely have a look at the reports that you have mentioned. And I think maybe we could just move on to the fact that, how many youth these days actually find the allure in investment banking as well as in wealth management. So maybe you could just give us like one piece of advice that you think that we should all take note of as we try and make a break into these industries.
Yeah, I think you know the question I'm going to ask you.
Yes, I know. I will just repeat myself.
Sorry. Yeah.
So maybe because I think we don't
Sure,
really have a lot of time left. Maybe you could just go on to the last part of what are the three most important takeaways that you want our listeners to have from this interview.
Sure. Look, I think at the end of the day, my big takeaway or rather my big thing that I would like to impart the listeners with regards to at least career advice. I think there's a very strong, or rather there's something very, very good to be thought about this phrase, which is crossing a river by feeling the stones or whatever, right? And I think in a way, sometimes we get a bit too caught up in this idea of people really trying to find an overarching purpose or a big goal that they could work towards. It's very difficult. Sometimes you learn things about yourself actually just by trying it out. So I think this process of cross that river of life, if you will, but by just kind of one stone at a time, and then as you go along and you look back, I think you will realize things about yourself, and then you will actually try and extract these common threads. So as part of that, I think it would be that don't just stick to one job. I think there is benefit to changing jobs, to learning about yourself. And then I think that one of the benefits I find for economics is that it's probably one of the most versatile fields around. You can have a career in finance, like I'm having. You can have also a career in public policy, which I think is also useful. And then you can also have a career in academia. And I think these different aspects all speak to the versatility of economics. So I think it is a great time, and I do think that actually Singapore does emerge actually stronger from what we've gone through over the past year and a bit. And so I think it's a great time to be a student and to take advantage of that.
Thank you so much. And then with that, actually, we have come to the end of this episode of the impacT Podcast. We would like to thank Dr. Kannan for taking the time to come down and actually answer the questions that we had and give us a little more insight into what GIC actually does. So then, thank you, Dr. Kannan.